Welcome, welcome. Here we are, my friends. We are on week, whatever we are. I think it's week 7 or 8. We are talking about control. We're talking about anxiety. We are talking about the tendency that we have to lasso the future, to try to lasso the future, to try to make the future conform to our needs, our wants, and how that so often just leaves us out of control and stuck and worse off in the first place. So we'll give a moment to allow people to arrive here. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And let me just pull up my notes here. This beautiful Friday afternoon. I don't know about you guys. I don't know how the weather is. Let me know how the weather's doing for you. My weather is, we have such beautiful skies here. It feels like spring is coming. Yeah, it's just a beautiful day. So let me pull this up for us. Okay, today's been really interesting. I shared about the group that I'm running, and I put a story up, and I've had so many people uh, reaching out to learn more. That it's been really fun. So, happy Friday, beautiful, sunny, social. That's SoCal. That's awesome. I'd love to hear where you're all coming from, where you're calling from. It's one of the most fun things about this for me is that we get to connect. I get to connect with people all over the world. I love traveling. I love learning about people. I love learning about cultures. So it's always really fun. I'd love to hear, where you guys are calling from. And today we are talking about anxiety. Mexico City. Hola, ¿cómo estás? We are looking at how we have this tendency to try to grab onto the future. I love this line that Berkman uses. It's at the very end of the page, end of the chapter. But he says that, well, I guess let me start off here. I'm jumping in right now, right away. Here we are for our book study. We are reading 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals by Oliver Berkman. And today we are reading chapter 7. Chapter 7 is We Never Really Have Time. And Berkman's pointing out how we treat time like a possession. We treat time like something that we have. But in reality, it's not ever something that we get to possess. It's something we ride or that we work with. What we say when we say, oh, I have time to do this, is we say that we expect to have time. But in reality, time is not ever something that we can possess. And so many of our time-related problems are because we want to possess time. We want to make time to conform to our desires rather than us living and adjusting to time and reality. And so he says here, we treat our plans, although they are a lasso, thrown from the present moment into the future in order to try to bring it under our command. But all a plan could ever be, is a present moment statement of intent. It's an expression of your current thoughts about how you'd like to deploy your modest influence over the future. The future, of course, is under no obligation to comply. So as we're getting started here, I just want to invite you to ask yourself, I want you to think about your relationship to the future. I'd love to hear about your plans that you have. What are the ways that your attempt to control the future is actually stressing you out, is actually overwhelming you? What are some of the ways that you have these very set, fixed intentions or agendas that actually are causing you difficulty, frustration, and misery? Because we like to think about time as a resource. We like to think about time as something that we have. And we all want, right? We say it all the time. I say it. This is something that I'm learning to step back from. I don't have the time. We don't have time. I don't have enough time to get everything done. But that's wrong from the beginning. It's really not something that's ever guaranteed. The only thing that we do have, the only thing that we are guaranteed, is right now. And so one of the greatest difficulties that we have is actually just allowing ourselves to be fully in this moment. Because this misunderstanding of trying to possess time is what drives our anxiety. And it's actually our desire to control the future, to control reality, that's what anxiety is in the first place. And so here, one of the things that Bergman talks about is how he comes from a family of obsessive planners. I'm curious if anybody else can relate to this. He says, my wife and I are lucky to make it until the end of June in any given year before receiving our first inquiry from my parents for our plans for Christmas. This is certainly not how my family is, but my wife's family a little bit more so. That we can have such an intention to try to make sure that everything plays out perfectly. And one of the things that Bergman talks about here is that for him and his family, he traces it back to his great-grandmother, right? And his whole family at one point escaped from Nazi Germany on a boat. And he was talking about how that fear and that difficulty that was passed down after this obsessive planning, this making sure that everything's everywhere that it needs to be. In internal family systems theory, we call this a legacy burden. And a legacy burden is when the painful experiences that others have experienced then get passed down to us vicariously. Things like you have to be on time, you have to be on time, you have to be on time. Because at one moment in life, that was a real life-threatening problem. And so that burden can get passed down, and we, without realizing it, can kind of just inherit this family culture of pressure, of obsessive planning, this feeling of needing to be completely under a schedule. And as one of the comments says here, but that schedule never works out because it's an impossible ask. That we never know what's going to happen. The present moment is always unfolding. And so what Bergman says here is that it's not especially hard to see how an innocent German Jewish girl arriving in London on the eve of the Second World War might acquire and later pass on to her children the unshakable belief that if you don't plan things exactly right, some very bad fate might befall you or those you loved. And this brings me to this quote from, or this kind of sense from Don Winnicott, who is a psychologist, who says, the greatest fears that we have about the future are traumas that we've already lived through in the past. And one of the ways that I've heard it said is that our nightmares about the future are actually the traumas that we've actually experienced. And that's what fear is. Fear is the projection of our painful experiences onto the future. And so when we don't process those, they so easily get passed on. And he says the trouble with being so invested emotionally in planning for the future, though, is that while it might occasionally prevent catastrophe, the rest of the time it tends to just exacerbate the very anxiety it was supposed to allay. The obsessive planner essentially is demanding certain reassurances from the future. But the future isn't the type of thing that can ever provide the reassurances that he craves, for the obvious reason that it's still in the future. And even when we do have plans and they go accordingly, well, then there's just more future and it doesn't really matter because the fear is past already. And so instead, our uncertainty just gets pushed further and further into the horizon. And he says here, worry at its core is the repetitious experience of a mind attempting to generate a feeling of security about the future, failing, and then trying again and again and again. I wonder who here can connect with that. I sure can. He says it's as if the very effort we believe of worrying might somehow forestall the disaster. In other words, the fuel behind our worry is the internal demand to know in advance that things will turn out fine, that your partner won't leave you, that you will have sufficient money to retire, that a pandemic won't claim the lives of anyone you love, that your favorite candidate will win the election, that you can get through your to-do list by the end of Friday afternoon. But the struggle for control over the future is a stark example of our refusal to acknowledge our built-in limitations when it comes to time. Because it's a fight the warrior obviously won't ever win. You can never be certain about the future. And that's just the fact. Because anything can happen. And so we never have time, says David Kane, in the sense that we have cash in our wallet or the shoes on our feet. And when we claim that we have time, what we really mean is that we expect to have it. But it's not something that ever comes into our possession. Because anything can happen at any moment. And so one of the things that I've noticed is that in these moments, I can become afraid of things happening. And so I can try to shift into control. And so what we're talking about here, this illusion of control. You're never going to be guaranteed anything of the time that you have in the future. Instead, you just find that you're in each moment as it comes. You're here right now. You're already thrown into this time and this place with all the limitations that are here. And you're unable to feel certain about what might happen next. As Heidegger said in the previous chapter, we are time. We're riding time. Time isn't something that we possess. It's a very part of the fabric of our experience. The assumption that time is something that we can possess or control is the unspoken premise of almost all of our thinking about the future that causes anxiety and worry. But it's not something that we control. And so he says here, the issue isn't that we want to have control. That's not a problem. It's actually okay to influence the future. But the issue, he says here on page 118, our efforts to influence the future aren't the problem. The problem, the source of all the anxiety, is the need we feel from our vantage point here in the present moment to be able to know that those efforts will prove successful. But it's a recipe for a life of unending stress because you cannot be certain about the future. And so the more we demand certainty from the future, the more hopeless we become. The less we're actually present in the moment. And so one of these ways that I've recognized for me that fear of the future, that illusion of control, is that for me, and I'm curious if anybody can relate to this. You can drop an emoji or send me a comment to let me know. I have a real fear of failure because there's parts of me that have a really hard time distinguishing between the things that I do and my personal value and worth. Now I'm working with those parts, I'm building a relationship, but they're there. And so when the fear of failure comes up, or when I feel like I'm gonna fail at something, and this has happened to me so many times over the last couple months of being here on social media, there's a part of me that wants to protect me from that failure. And so I launched what I now am affectionately calling rescue missions. And so say, for example, there was a time when I was thinking like, okay, I'm trying to put this group together. And I thought to myself, okay, well, what I'll do is I'll create, this 10-part mini series and tie everything back in. It's this elaborate rescue mission. And there's this part of me that says, I don't want to fail. So what am I going to do? I'm going to create this scheme to absolutely guarantee that I can't fail. Again, it's a guarantee that I'm trying to sustain. Now, here's the problem. My rescue missions, the very things that I'm trying to do to absolutely make sure that I don't fail, they're so complex that I don't have the time. I don't have the resources to complete them. And so then I try to do these kind of elaborate rescue missions to try to guarantee that the future will turn out the way that I want it to and protect me from failure. And those very rescue missions then just increase the stress because it's more attempts to control. And then at some point I get burnt out and overwhelmed and tired, and I feel that failure of the rescue missions. And again, there's this part of me that wants to try to prove myself, to try to launch another rescue mission. And so what I've learned is that for me, when I'm afraid, rather than trying to come up with a plan that makes it guaranteed that I won't fail, I'm learning to just lean into the risk. As Irving Yalom says, there's no growth without risk. And when we live in fear of risk, we allow fear to hold our growth hostage. And when we need to have a guarantee of the future, we cease to be here, trying to grab on something that doesn't exist. I heard it explained recently as a golden chain. The golden chain is this perfect way of protecting ourselves, but it still chains us and leaves us imprisoned. And this is so common. We can have this mentality that I don't want to risk getting hurt, so I'm gonna heal myself completely. I'm gonna learn these coping skills. We can just approach this in another way, as Karen Horney calls it, what is it called? The search for glory. And so here's a really important and helpful distinction that I've come to, and it's a distinction between intention and agenda. Agendas are forward focused and outcome focused. In an agenda, there's a very clear yes or no. And I think most of our times when we're experiencing anxiety, there's an agenda. Either an agenda to not feel bad, an agenda to not feel sad, an agenda to not feel disconnected, but it's this need to control the outcome. But an intention is different. And when we have an intention is present focused and it's flexible. And an intention helps us to move towards an end, but not in such an obsessive way that loses where we are in the process. It's so easy, right? To get so focused on the outcome, and then we lose connection with the here and now. We become completely disconnected. And so he brings us to this reflection of looking back on what can we actually control. He says here, our anxieties about the future and the uncontrollability of it begin to seem rather more absurd and perhaps a little easier to let go of when we consider the context of the past. We go through our days fretting because we can't control what the future holds. And yet most of us probably concede that we got to where we are in our lives without exerting much control over it. Whatever you value most about your life can always be traced back to some jumble of chance occurrences that you couldn't possibly have planned for, and that you certainly can't alter retrospectively. You might never have been invited to the party where you met your spouse. Your parents might have never moved into the neighborhood near the school that you found your friends or the teachers. And so if you look back at the past, it's an even more dizzying matter of coincidence, piled up on coincidence, that we are here and that we've become who we are. And so there can be actually a consolation in this realization that despite our total lack of control over anything in the past, you've made it here. And so perhaps control isn't so much what we need, but freedom to be in the moment. And this is what surrender is. Surrender occurs when we allow this moment to be as it is. It doesn't mean we like it, but we allow this moment to be as it is. It's when we stop trying to change reality to fit us and learn to be with reality. Learn to connect with reality. When we learn to let go. I was reading this morning, you can see this in my story from a book called He Leadeth Me. And this priest was talking about trusting God. And he talked about this moment of desire and anxiety, this belief and anxiety when a child is learning to swim, terrified of drowning. But what needs to happen is that child just lets their breath balance and lean back. And in that, the very fear of drowning is what's faced. And in regulating the breath, connecting, that child is held. This is one of the craziest things, right? We're all here right now. And we can't really explain how or why. This moment is just happening one after the next. I'm talking to you here in my small town. I'm talking to a camera. You guys are all receiving this message. These thoughts that you're having, these thoughts, one comes after another, after another, after another. We're here and we exist through powers that are beyond our control. We cling to our independence and to our desire to control because we're afraid, because we've been hurt in the past. We're afraid of being hurt again. And this is where Berkman brings us to focusing on what we can control. He says here in Minding Your Own Business on 121, the truths about the uncontrollability of the past and the unknowability of the future explain why so many spiritual traditions seem to converge on the same advice, that we should aspire to confine our attention to the only portion of time that really is any of our business. This one, right here, in the present moment. It really is all we have. As a Buddhist scholar, Gish Shawupa says, do not rule over imaginary kingdoms of endlessly proliferating possibilities. Do not rule over imaginary kingdoms of endlessly proliferating possibilities. This right here is one of the great challenges of our times, my friends. That there is so much in potential. There's so many potential partners. There's so many potential jobs. There's so many potential places. There's so many people to follow. There's so many potential practices. And we can want to get it perfect. You can't get it perfect. And bring anything from potential into actuality means saying no to everything else and being with this. And that's this, responding right here, is the only thing that we really can control. And I don't think we have to be confined to those fears right now because of the pains that we've experienced, because we can heal from those experiences. When we are anxious about the future, it's because we've experienced hurts that we have not processed in the past. And so we're not seeing the future with clarity from our sense of centered self. We're seeing the future through the eyes of young, wounded parts of ourselves that haven't been able to process that experience. And so the only thing that we have control of is this moment right here. And he even talks about Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount of take no thought for tomorrow because tomorrow will take care of itself. Sufficient to the day right now are the evils at hand. There's enough worry. You can let tomorrow worry about itself. And then he says, who of you can add 1 cubit? Who can add 1 moment to your life by worrying? Worrying is our attempt to control the future. It's a hopeless attempt. And instead, our task, as Eric Fromm says, our task is not to feel secure, but rather to tolerate insecurity. And so letting go of the need to control the future is about letting go of the inner demand to know that the future will conform to our desires. And so if we don't have to demand that the future will conform to our desires, we don't have to be on the edge of our seats as it unfolds. To the extent that we're able to stop demanding certainty that things will go our own way, we're liberated from the anxiety in the only moment that ever counts. Right here. So planning is an essential tool for building our meaningful life. And the problem isn't actually planning. It's our demand for plans to be something that they aren't. This brings us back to where we began. Joseph Goldstein says, a plan is just a thought. We treat our plans as though they are a lasso, thrown from the present moment around the future in order to bring it under our control. But all a plan is, all it could ever be, is a present moment statement of intent. It's an expression of our current thoughts about how we'd like the future to go. But the future is under no obligation to comply. There's been nothing more scary in my life than letting go of control. And there's also been nothing more liberating. Letting go of control means recognizing that I really don't have all the answers, and I won't ever get them all. It means not knowing what I'll find when I look inside. But what I do find is that there is a plan for my future, and it's not about X's and O's, it's about relationship. That I'm drawn into relationship always. I always thought when I was younger that God's plan for my life meant this XO, and it was kind of like getting on the conveyor belt, and I would find God's plan and I would take off. What I've come to realize and believe is that God's plan is not, in my understanding, about what we do. It's about being in relationship with Him. And so who we are with, how we are with, is much more important than what we do. We are relational beings. We're relational all the way up, all the way down. We can't escape reactionality. And so being drawn into relationship with existence itself, this is life-changing. And it's also the moment of surrender. To surrender to existence on its own terms, even terms that I can't control or change. So I'd love to welcome thoughts and questions here. We'll be picking up next week with chapter 8, You Are Here, on page 125. If you're interested in joining the book study, comment book club, and you'll be added to the email list. So I want to welcome you to ask questions that you have about anxieties and control of the future. And I want to ask you all some questions as well. I want to ask, I want you to think about your relationship to the future. Think about your plans. Do you have an ironclad agenda to make sure they turn out the way that you want? Or do you have an intention that can be flexible and shift? When you worry, I want you to ask yourself this and share it here if it comes to mind. When you worry, think about the worries that you have. What reassurances are you demanding? What certainty are you trying to get when you worry? And what are you missing right now? What's happening in your life right now that you're not present to because you're afraid of how things will turn out? It's so easy for me when things feel uncertain to launch this rescue mission, this infallible, undestroyable plan that says, I guarantee that if I do this, if I do X, Y, or Z, the future will turn out the way that I want. And that's just not possible. What I can control is how I show up. What I can control is how I live out my values. And no matter what happens in the future, there's no situation in which my values can't be the guiding light. And so anxiety is about control. Our worries and our plans for the future, they're about control. But we've all made it here with a lot of things that aren't under our control. And when we can realize that, it can give us a lot of freedom to simply be here and let go of that need to control. So I would love to hear, what are the things that you all are wrestling with right now? What are the challenges and the fears of the future that are stopping you from being present? Yeah. When we lean in and do our best, that in itself is enough. Yes, when so often our very desire to control the future is often part of what makes it not turn out the way that we want. And that's about our values, right? When we just show up the way that we choose to show up with integrity, then oftentimes, even when the future doesn't work, we have that consolation of being connected to ourselves. But also, it actually really changes the way that things show up too. I love that. Yeah, after experiencing loss and life falling apart, feeling hesitant to attach yourself to any goals or plans. But I do miss dreaming and being excited for something. Man, I love how honest that is, Marge. I love how honest that is. There's good reasons for us to be afraid to attach things because it hurts. It hurts, and I just feel so deep. I feel so deeply empathic because there's no way out of this life without us getting hurt and our hearts being broken. And grief is so important because grief teaches us that hurt doesn't have the last word. When we don't know how to grieve, it means that we haven't learned that there's a journey of healing. That journey of healing can be painful and difficult. But what comes on the other side is actually deeper connection to ourselves and that ability to live and laugh and love again. And oftentimes these young parts of us have been hurt. And they need to learn that they can connect to us, that we can connect with them and take care of them. That we can surrender. This is for me why the practice of mindfulness meditation, why prayer, why journaling is so important, is that being able to really share honestly my difficulties, my challenges, my fears, being able to allow those young parts of me to emerge and just say, hey, I'm scared of getting hurt. I'm scared of the grief. I'm scared of the pain. This is something that's just so powerful. So thank you all for being here. It's been such a joy to be with you. Tune back next week if you want to be a part of this book club. Comment book club below. I do this each week. So this is the book club, and then on Tuesdays I send out an email with this video reflection. So if you want this whole video reflection, comment book club. And then I send an email with some reflection questions and my own reflection on that chapter. And I welcome your feedback. So thank you all who are here. So next week we are reading You Are Here by Oliver Burkeman. Oh, you're so welcome. You're so welcome. Thank you all for being here. We're reading You Are Here by Oliver Burkeman, page 125 to Where are we at? 140. So next week we are reading pages 125 to 140 in Time Management for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman, exploring this existential approach to our mortality and recognizing all the ways that we try to grab onto control and finding freedom from this sense of not having enough time by living life on its terms, this fundamental yes to reality. So next week we'll be reading You Are Here, chapter 8, 125 to 140. If you would like to join the book club, there's an email list. You can just comment book club. You'll be sent this and the book and or a link to the book. And yeah, thank you so much for being here. I wish you all the happiest Friday and good health to you and all your loved ones. So peace, thank you, and take good care.